my distinguished colleague from Arkansas, and ask him whether he agrees that the collection of telephone and call data does not raise any reasonable expectations of privacy under the Fourth Amendment.
Well, I thank the Senator from North Carolina, and I appreciate his work and the majority leader's work on this critical issue. I've been working hand in glove with them all along. I would say the answer to the question is no. This does not raise any reasonable concern about privacy. In fact, the program does not collect any content. It does not surveil any phone call. It doesn't even include any personally identifiable information. I have spent hours with the intelligence officers and the FBI agents who are responsible for administering these programs, not merely the general counsels or the directors of these agencies, but the men and women who administer them themselves. And I've asked them, what do they think poses a greater risk to their privacy? The discount grocery card that the Senator from North Carolina mentioned, or the fact that e-commerce websites have their name and address, credit card number, purchasing history. And to a person, every one of them said a greater threat to their privacy are those commercial marketing practices, not this program. The program has been approved 40 times by 15 different independent federal judges based on 36 years of Supreme Court precedent, and has been approved by 2 presidents of both parties. And if President Obama wanted to end the program tomorrow, he could, but he hasn't. That's because this program is lawful, it is faithful to the Constitution, it is smothered with safeguards against abuse, and it is needed to fight the rising terrorist threats that we face today. In fact, those threats today are greater than they were on 9/11, and that's not my opinion. That is the testimony of this administration's senior intelligence officials. The rise of al-Qaeda affiliates in Africa and the Arabian Peninsula and the broader Middle East illustrates the metastasis of al-Qaeda following its retreat from Afghanistan. These groups are larger and more spread out than their predecessors. They're also more technological and operationally savvy, developing new non-metallic bombs, recruiting Westerners, and using the internet to spread their hatred. They even publish how-to manuals for becoming a successful terrorist at home. Of course, there's the Islamic State. The Obama-described JV team, which has cut the heads off Americans, is torturing and murdering Christians and other religious minorities and has sadistically burned people alive. More than 20,000 foreigners have gone to Syria and Iraq to join this enemy. Some have returned to their home countries, including the United States. Some have remained in their home countries, becoming more radicalized and ready to inflict harm against Americans. And we don't have to look any further than this past week when 2 Islamic State-inspired jihadists decided to open fire in Texas. Press reports indicate that one of the attackers was in contact with an Islamic State supporter currently located in Somalia. This conduct illustrates why this program is so important. It helps close the gap that existed between foreign intelligence gathering and stopping attacks here at home before 9/11. This is the gap that contributed in part to our failure to stop the 9/11 attacks. There are also open source reports of Islamic State cells in Virginia, Maryland, Illinois, California, and Michigan. As a member of the Intelligence Committee, I receive regular briefings on such threats. And I invite all my colleagues to receive these briefings if they doubt that the wolves are at the door or even in our country. And this highlights one challenge of our debate. Most of the information surrounding these plots and the programs are classified. The intelligence community has been very accommodating in providing classified briefings to members of the Senate and the Congress. The issue, though, is often getting members to attend or to go visit with the agencies. That's why I believe the Senate may have to enter a closed session as we debate these programs so that members are not willfully ignorant of the threat that America faces. Now, under consideration in the House and proposed in the Senate is the so-called USA Freedom Act, which will eliminate the essential intelligence this program collects. Proponents of the bill claim that it provides alternative ways for the intelligence community to obtain critical information needed to stop terrorist attacks, and that it doesn't compromise our counterterror efforts. But let me be clear, this is wrong. The alternatives to the current program would not come close to offering the capabilities that now enable us to protect Americans. One alternative offered by opponents of this program is to have phone companies retain control of all call data and provide the NSA only the data responsive to searches that the phone companies would run on the agency's behalf. This isn't technologically feasible. At the request of the President's own Director of National Intelligence, the Independent National Research Council examined the proposal, and its experts concluded that the technology does not currently exist that would enable a system spread among different carriers to replace the capabilities of the current NSA program. Any such system would create gaping holes in our ability to identify terrorist connections. First, phone companies don't store the data for longer than 180 days, and oftentimes for much shorter periods. And nothing in the USA Freedom Act requires them to store it any longer. The current program, however, stores data for 5 years, which allows the NSA to discover potential terrorist links during that time period. A system that keeps data with multiple carriers who store their data for much shorter and differing time periods is close to useless in discovering terrorist network and sleeper cells, many of which lie in wait for years before launching an attack. Second, a system that tries to search multiple carriers and then collects and unifies the responses is cumbersome and time-consuming. In many investigations, the loss of valuable minutes, hours, days may mean the difference between stopping an attack or seeing it succeed. Third, the data stored with phone companies rather than the NSA are more vulnerable to hackers who would seek to abuse the data. Fourth, the costs are unknown, and the American people will bear them, either as taxpayers if the telecom companies ask to be reimbursed, or as consumers as the telecom companies pass along the cost on your phone bill, perhaps as a NSA collection fee. And fifth, to those people who say this is technologically feasible, we can easily execute it, I would remind you this is the federal government that brought you healthcare.gov. Now, a second alternative offered by opponents to the program is to pay a third-party contractor or quasi-private entity to store data and run the program. I would argue this is untested and unworkable. First, the proposal would also require an indefinite stream of taxpayer dollars to fund it. Second, the private entity may be subject to civil litigation discovery orders, as it may hold information relevant to cases, which would expose Americans' data to judicial proceedings with no connection to national security and without the security and privacy protections in place today. Third, a new organization will create the need for heavy security, top-secret clearances for employees, and strong congressional oversight. As more resources are devoted to such an entity, what we would end up with is a reconstituted NSA program, but at additional cost to taxpayers and greater threats to privacy. Now, as I mentioned, I've taken the opportunity in recent months to go and visit the men and women who work at the NSA and the FBI. I can tell you all, they are fine Americans with the highest character. I've spent hours with a very small number of men and women at Fort Meade who are actually allowed to search this data. I would ask how many of the critics of the program have actually done this. And let's examine in detail how these men and women search this data. An independent federal court regularly approves the NSA's authority to collect and store the data in the first place. But for these men and women to even look at the data, it must go through a multi-step process that includes approval by 4 different entities at the NSA, numerous attorneys at the Department of Justice, and those very same judges who sit on that court. And even if a search request is granted, not just anyone at the NSA can access the data. Access is limited to this small group of men and women, all of whom undergo regular background checks, drug tests, and are subject to regular polygraphs, many of whom are military veterans themselves. And to prevent abuse of the program, in retrospect, searches of the data are automatically recorded and regularly audited by both the Inspector General and the Department of Justice, with strict penalties for anyone found to have committed any abuse. Moreover, I, the Senator from North Carolina, and other members of the intelligence committees of both houses of this Congress participate in these reviews. This is a robust and layered set of protections for Americans, their privacy, and these protections would not exist under the proposed USA Freedom Act. There are also protections that almost definitely will not be adopted by private telecom providers, whom some wrongly suggest might contain exclusive control of this data. These multiple safeguards are why, to date, these programs have a sterling record with no verified instances of intentional abuse, not a single one. Madam President, in conclusion, in the wake of the traitorous Snowden disclosures, Senator Chambliss, Senator Feinstein showed great leadership when they came together to defend these programs as both legal and effective. As Senator Feinstein, when she was chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, wrote that to end this program will substantially increase the risk of another catastrophic attack in the U.S., That is a proposition with which I wholeheartedly agree. I now see my colleague from the Judiciary Committee on the floor, himself a former U.S. Attorney and State Attorney General, and I would wonder if he agrees that this program is both constitutional and does not differ in substantial ways from the traditional tools that prosecutors can use against criminals while also providing adequate safeguards to American privacy.
Thank you, Senator Cotton.